ACES is a partnership of Belgium, Dutch, British and German think tanks and business networks. And together we are pushing for an ambitious circular economy policy in Europe. So our members include, and many of them are in the room, Grüne the Ecologic Institute, IEEP, Unternehmensgrün, the Aldersgate Group, and Green Alliance. And we really want to thank the MAVA Foundation for supporting the organization of this event. So my name is Céline Charveriat. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for European Environmental Policy. We are a European Sustainability think tank, and we are a member of ACES. So today is a very timely event since the European Commission announced its eco-design plans yesterday. So I don't know who was in charge with choosing the date, but you clearly had some insider information. And we're extremely fortunate to have with us distinguished panelists. So with us we have Sirpa Pietkainen, did I say that all right? Finnish MEP from the EPP group. She served as a rapporteur on the circular economy, and she summed up the challenge ahead of us in the following way. We have to ensure growing benefits for consumers and competitiveness using only 1/10 of the materials that we currently use. We also have Seb Dance. He hasn't arrived, but I'm told he's on his way. UK MEP from the S&D group, a strong supporter of eco-design as well as the circular economy, and also in favor of EU action on microplastics pollution. We also have Lakin from the business community. He's the group director of government affairs and communities of Kingfisher, the home improvement company, with over 1,000 stores in Europe and a member of the Aldersgate group. And last but not least, Dustin Benton, the head of resources from Green Alliance, an NGO who's been actively campaigning on circular economy issues, including eco-design. So here is how the event will run. We'll have an initial 10 to 15 minutes presentation by Dustin, presenting Green Alliance's new report. And then we'll have 7 to 8 minute remarks from each panelist, and then a debate with the audience. So one last rule. No one is allowed to mention the T and the H words. By that, I do not mean toasters and hairdryers. I mean the other T and H words, unless, of course, you can make a plausible link between US elections outcomes results and eco-design. So without further ado, Dustin, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to sit over here just with my laptop beside me here, so apologies for the slightly informal setup. So our chair has just given me a challenge which I wasn't expecting, linking the T and H words to eco-design. So I'm going to do my very best to do that. And I'm going to start with an example from the United States. I should say I am from the United States, although I live in the UK and I'm also a British citizen, so I'm feeling slightly tender right now. But let me try to make my US elections and my eco-design. So this is about product standards. This is a crash test done between the cheapest American Nissan, which is the silver car there, and the cheapest Mexican Nissan, which is the red car there. The difference between these two cars are product standards. The one on the top there, you can see, in essence, if you have the misfortune of being sitting right here, you'd not be a very happy bunny. If you have the misfortune of being in this one, you'd be all right. My point is that product standards can be popular. They can almost even be populist. The results of this video, which came out about a week ago, is that Nissan has removed the car in red from being sold in Mexico because so many people got angry at the difference between standards across a border, which in some cases you can't even see in the desert between the south of the United States and Mexico. So my point is, if we're living in a world of populism, maybe we should make eco-design and product standards populist. So let's think about why not do eco-design, given that we think there ought to be good populist reasons to do it. There are lots of bad arguments. They're too hard to do, they're too expensive, or most significantly, they're too intrusive, which is something that the European Commission has suggested they are. We think these arguments are wrong, and I'm going to sort of set out why, starting from the kind of bottom and working my way up. Eco-design very clearly has a tabloid problem, certainly in the UK. You get headlines saying, you know, my toasters, Brussels is going to ruin my toast. So, you know, lo and behold, he did, and sadly, the Commission seemed to back down. But I don't think we should necessarily. I don't think we should necessarily obsess about tabloids, and that's because not the entire media is not tabloids. This graphic, which you see here, or this news article, is from a reasonably famous Eurosceptic and indeed a climate skeptic, Christopher Brooker, who really likes ecodesign. And he likes ecodesign, in his words, because he says it's basically, this is the sort of thing that Europe should do. It should be protecting consumers, giving them the best sorts of products. In fact, I'll even quote, "Perhaps Brussels could now consider making it illegal to produce kettles that last only a year or two before we have to buy new ones." That's something to think about for the policy officials in the room. I don't think we should necessarily ignore the tabloids who this person writes for in some cases. They did win the British public over to voting for Brexit, so they do matter. But I think there is a way to overcome their sorts of objections in a way that even tabloids might get on side for. And that's to focus on the tangible consumer benefits. And our message here is that resources, incorporating resources into ecodesign is a way to make them populist, to make them relevant. So I've got a little confession here. My mobile phone, I have broken the screen for 3 times because I'm a bit clumsy. I remember the number of times because it's ugly, the screen stops working, and then I have to pay to fix it, and it's a real pain, and it makes me irritated with the product. These issues matter to everyone. They're pretty immediate. As you can see from the stats here, around half of people have actually cracked the screen on their phone at some point. Secondly, most people feel really helpless about this. You can't make the company sort of make a more durable phone just by buying it. And similarly with the software stuff, you can't make the company give you a software update. Most people don't even really know what those are. But policy can. And this is where ecodesign comes in. The technology to solve the sorts of problems, to solve the broken screens, it's already here, it's on the market. Genuinely unbreakable screens are being sold, but they're not the norm, they're not commonplace. And ecodesign can require that, what is already on the market, to become the norm. And I think more significantly, telling consumers that their phone isn't going to break anymore because of something the EU has done is populist. Most people will say, this is something that's really tangible, that EU policy has done this thing for me. One of the things that comes out, one of the policies that comes out most popularly with people is the roaming charges restrictions which the EU has put in place. Why? It's really tangible. Nobody wants to get home after a holiday and think, I've just got a huge amount of money on my bill because I happened to cross a border, I didn't think about it. So our message, I guess, is rather than reducing the range of policies we regulate, trying to pull back, actually we should regulate better and in some cases regulate a broader range of products. I should say I work for a think tank, so I know that the legal basis of ecodesign is not what's popular, it's not what consumers necessarily want, it's the environmental impact, so I'm just going to touch on that. I mean, basically, for anything that runs on a battery and lots of other things, the main environmental impact has shifted from energy in use into energy from manufacturing, which is that big wodge on the pie chart there. And the implications of this are that keeping products in use for longer make a huge difference. So we've calculated that keeping a smartphone in use for just an additional year cuts its carbon footprint by about 1/3. That's a really significant saving. You can go further if smartphones last for even longer. And if you aggregate up these savings from lots of different products, researchers from the University of Leeds looked at this and they said that some of the quick wins, which are the little green thing there, are on the order of savings that you would expect from the UK smart metering programme, which the British government is spending £11 billion on. And the sort of best practice stuff, things that can be done, we know companies are already doing them, wouldn't be that far off on what the EU has done on vehicle efficiency, which is a huge and extraordinarily effective policy. So my second kind of point here, that's all about the first one. The second point is about cost. We know that consumers expect washing machines to last for about 12 years, but 1 in 6 fails in the first 5 years. This is irritating, this is frustrating, this is a sort of tangible thing. We also know that the average cost to repair the drum, because things are built in a totally integrated way these days, is about 200 quid. That's expensive and very salient. By contrast, the upfront cost of a durable washing machine, and these are real washing machines, is about £28 more expensive.
but it's also much, much cheaper if you think about it over the entire course of the lifetime. This one lasts for 7 years. That one's got a 10-year lifetime guarantee. So per year, it's much cheaper. There are people who can't afford the more expensive stuff up front. That's certainly true. And that's where we think circular economy business models like servitization or indeed leasing can come in to help those consumers get access to the best sorts of things. And I guess my final point is that it's actually not that difficult. The sorts of interventions that we're talking about here are not rocket science. In fact, we looked at some of the most complex products out there, solar panels, because we thought this is a really complicated, difficult, high-tech thing. Is this going to be too difficult for us? And the answer is, well, no. So at the moment when we recycle solar panels, we essentially crush them up and we try to recover the silicon back out of them. That loses 98% of the value in that silicon cell. 2% of the value comes back as raw materials. But there's a simple solution. Use plastic to fix those that melts. At the moment, the industry doesn't do that. But if you were to be able to melt out the plastic, you could recover the solar cells. Those are reusable. That would cut the carbon footprint of the second life solar panel by about 2/3, so very significant, and retain much more of the value, over 50%, we think. Simple to do as well, switching from one type of plastic to another, very, very straightforward. We've checked with real honest-to-God scientists who actually know what they're talking about, and they say that this is genuinely doable. So I guess the overall message is good arguments for eco-design is that it's cheaper, it's greener, and if we make it more relevant to people, we think that we ought to be able to sell it. Thank you very much.
Economy package. So what's your reaction to the plans presented yesterday by DEC? I know we don't have yet the details. And how do you see this particular piece, eco-design, fitting into an ambitious package for a more circular economy in Europe? In your view, what's missing? What needs to happen next?
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this alliance and this very interesting discussion, because we really need to push strongly towards the Commission and towards the Parliament and towards Member States about the eco-design and the circular economy package. Well, first of all, to take the good parts, good that they lastly came with the eco-design directive next phase. That actually has quite substantive list of products that can save up the amount of the energy Sweden is using. So it is significant. But quite telling about the political climate is that you leave out the toasters. Because that was a populistic debate that tells that the politicians are not ready to face and to explain what it is all about. And I'm not saying that the toasters would save the world. Then the second point there is, and this has been on the Parliament's own initiative report, the idea that we are trying to push very strongly forward that there needs to be a broadening of the scope of eco-design directive in the future, full stop. Not only energy efficiency, but the other features. And there needs to be horizontal requirements, and this is my sort of a pet idea about the whole thing. All products sold in the EU, this means produced and imported, has to be upgradable. That means the phone, you could actually plan it so that you just upgrade the memory and the capacity and the program instead of throwing away all of the aluminium, metals and acrylics and whatever it contains. They need to be reusable, repairable. That's the part that irritates all of us in new gadgets, that you can't even repair them. They need to be, and 3D printing actually would come in pretty handy in some of the products and all products on this. They need to be remanufacturable, and this is already something that is happening on the manufacturing industry. Of course, my pen probably couldn't be that, but so this is very dependent about what kind of products we are talking about. Mm-hmm. And lastly, they need to be recyclable both mechanically and in the longer run on molecule level. And that comes in many materials like plastics, very important that you can really recover the important parts. And if we do not set the guidelines right in politics, you can't incentivize the industries. And actually the good industries that are actually developing wonderful innovation in these fields are disadvantaged. Doesn't make sense because we are using 1.5 planets now and we would need the resources of four planets within 30 years if we do not change anything, and we know this is not going to happen. So this is basically, and this is where I would like to conclude, this is a paradigm shift. You can't make it with this kind of a gradual incremental changes like energy efficiency, as important as they are. You need to change the regulatory framework. And the next steps, and these are besides eco-design, is it's the sustainable finances, how you put this in subsidies, how you put this in financial regulation, all this that sort of incentivizing bad behavior at the moment. And how you actually raise the reputation of a regulation. Regulation is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Just try to live in the world where you wouldn't regulate the ownership and see how it looks like, or what you can feed to people and call it medication. This is the same thing. If we want to survive and live here, we need regulation that supports the change, and we all together should create that kind of a lobby that pushes it forward strongly to overcome and overvoice the voices of whatever post-factual politics we are living in the different parts of the world, unfortunately, and this kind of a populistic media outcry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we heard from Sirpa that clearly there's a paradigm shift that's needed, and that politicians need to have the courage sometimes to face the media and to explain the issue to consumers. So now turning to Seb Dance, obviously from your point of view, in your country, the UK, we've seen a very strong backlash against eco-design policies, at least in the tabloid press. I mean, what's your view in terms of how politicians can really make those points across to consumers, and what does Brexit for you mean in terms of the UK being able to opt out of this kind of regulation in the future?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and apologies for coming in a little late. I got caught up in a demonstration outside, one of many to come, I think. I think you said at the beginning not to mention the election. I'm afraid I'm in a headspace a bit like I was on June the 24th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 30th, and right the way through July, and most of August, some of September, and probably just coming out of where I can't think of anything else. But this is the latest shock. And actually, there is a relevance, you'll be pleased to hear, to what we're discussing, which is, of course, we're now faced with the prospect of the largest economy in the world, a hugely influential partner on fighting climate change, one of the leading advocates for the Paris Agreement, a real kind of game changer in the last few years, particularly in Obama's second presidency, being replaced by... yeah, I mean, where do we start? I mean, kind of at some point you expect common sense to kick in because people say things and they act tough and they have a particular line that they campaign on. I'm not sure with this guy. I think what he says is what he thinks. And I'd love to think that at some point some kind of machinery of government mechanism will kick in. The people that worked with the Obama administration will not all completely disappear from the picture unless they all flee to Canada. They'll be working... I don't say that half jokingly, by the way. They will be working in some capacity to make sure that the fight goes on from within the United States. But I can't see him listening or paying any attention to that, which of course puts the onus on other parts of the world. And I tweeted, I don't know when it was, 4 or 5 in the morning. I can't remember, but that if we lose US leadership on this, we need leadership obviously from elsewhere. And where can it come from? Well, China. Can be a leader, and of course the EU can be a leader. But there's one thing that kind of really, really terrifies me on the back of what happened last night and on the back of Brexit. All of this, I think, is the same thing, by the way. And Sirpa was talking about the rise of populism and the lack of fortitude when it comes to politicians resisting it. But I think, you know, the terrifying thing in my mind is what could happen in France in the spring. And I'm so terrified by this prospect now that whatever any of us can do to try and prevent it, I think we need to, because we would then not just lose the United States as a global leader in the fight against climate change, we would probably lose the EU, as in the EU would collapse if Le Pen becomes president of France. And if that happens, well, who knows? Am I a doomsday scenario painter? Probably, and this is at the extreme end. The trouble is that all of the keys and signs that kind of get us to the extreme example of what a truly terrible year looks like have already happened, and I can't see anything changing very soon, which is why we have to keep our resolve when it comes to issues like this, because ultimately this can only be solved at a number of different levels working together. It's no good just having, as I say, that global leadership at the top. You need to have an entire industrial strategy. You need to have an entire economy that's geared up to allow the supply chains to be part of it. And that requires not just leadership at the top, but an understanding of the direction of travel that everybody's going in. For example, we've often talked about the conflict between economic growth and the green economy and being green, and it's always been portrayed as a clash. You know, you can't have one with the other. You either grow your economy or you save the planet. You can't do both. Of course, that's a nonsense, because countries like China and the United States and obviously the European Union working together have indeed come up with ideas to ensure that we get green growth, to ensure that we evaluate our economic base, to ensure we have low carbon growth, more jobs, more innovation, etc., etc., etc. It's obvious, or it should be obvious in a post-industrial climate, that that is the way in which we create new and more highly skilled jobs, and that applies, of course, in as much to eco-design as it does to any other element of the supply chain. The problem, of course, is that selling that is now going to become much, much harder, and attitudes are becoming very, very difficult to challenge. I mean, I came here to talk ostensibly about Brexit, and as I say, that has been my obsession for longer than I care to remember. But the thing about Brexit is, of course, is that it's exactly the same set of scenarios where people feel that they're redundant, they feel that their voice isn't heard, they feel that they somehow don't have any ownership of the political or economic space. And they're sold a complete pack of nonsense, which is, you know, in some cases fantastical, i.e. the idea that we can shut ourselves off and grow our economy and don't worry about climate change because it was invented by the Chinese, or, you know, that they kind of sell an extreme version of policies which seem attractive, and it's very easy for politicians to promise attractive and easy options. And my fear with Brexit is that it's kind of a mini version now. It was the big story of the year. It's now the kind of the warm-up act. But it's kind of like a mini version of what I fear is happening elsewhere in the world. And we just have to stand firm. We have to be clear in our beliefs about why we're doing what we're doing. But the key thing, of course, here when it comes to the specifics of Brexit is that the idea that an economy like Britain's can somehow opt out of design standards and then sell back into the European market having its own standards is a complete nonsense, of course. I spot a nice British plug over there, a BS, I can't remember what the standard number is. You know, we can't sell our stuff with a British plug on it into the European market and say, it's British, buy it. You know, people go, well, no thanks, you know, it's not going to work. A plug is an easy example. You can change a plug, but other bits, obviously, other aspects of eco-design you can't change. So, you know, that we have to be clear about what is realistic. We have to be clear about the direction that we're going in, and we have to be clear to fight this wave of nonsense. And I'm afraid this goes to every single level of public discourse. It's not just the job of politicians anymore. It is the job of business as well. It is the job of NGOs. It is the job of everybody with a vested interest in, frankly, saving our society and our planet to fight back?
Thank you very much. So clearly a very strong plea for more European leadership, and from a leadership that's not just from politicians but all parts of society, and also a clear realism that Brexit does not mean that somehow the UK can dissolve itself of obligations around product standards if it wants to continue to sell to the EU. So now let's turn to one place where leadership could happen, business. So eco-design is often described more as an innovation policy rather than an environmental policy. I mean, do you believe that it's true? Does it help European industry to innovate, European industry in general, but also a home improvement company like Kingfisher?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know, first just to say who Kingfisher is. So big home improvement retailer. We're actually the biggest British employer in France. So that's an interesting dynamic for us. We've also got 11,000 people in Poland, and we're in another 6 European countries as well as being large in the UK. So we see ourselves very much as a European business first and foremost. In answer specifically to your question, I think innovation generally, for the majority of people, and no offense to every environmentally committed person in this room, is sexier than environmentalism. And in that context, that might help make it more attractive and more interesting. And for my business, if I think about it from a business perspective, we're a business that has prided itself on taking quite a long-term environmental, sustainable agenda in a number of spaces. So we've pioneered responsible sourcing of timber, actively involved in European timber regulations, etc. But if I talk about it in my business, that will connect to the people who care about the environment, but that's not the majority of people. This also then leads into the consumer perspective as well. So it is, how do you make it relevant to their world? How do you make it of interest and connection to them? And that's fundamentally important. So I'm just going to have to react to what Seb was saying there about the roles of business and government and NGOs, and everyone needs to stand up to challenge this going forwards. My problem is that we've all been on the wrong side of the debate, and that we're not reflecting the realities of what is the majority of people's lives who feel deeply disconnected from all of this stuff. And that's the challenge, is how do we actually appreciate that and understand that and change that? And I don't have a great solution for that now, obviously, but we've clearly, European business, we had a clear view about Brexit as well. Now we're taking a very pragmatic view about how do you take it forward. And like you, I think on the European standards, you're right. Wherever the UK stands, we're a business that sources and sells products across multiple markets. We will match a common standard. REACH regulations, we adapt to REACH globally. Not just about Europe, it's about global, because it's just the most practical, cost-effective way to do it. And if it's practical and cost-effective, then it's probably pretty good for the consumer. And that, I think, to go back to Dustin's point at the start, is absolutely fundamental. The consumer piece, really understanding what works for consumers and also what they're interested in. So in my business, we've done quite a lot of research this year around sustainability. What do consumers think about it? And the harsh reality is most of them don't really think about it. They've got really busy lives. They're trying to raise families. They're trying to hold down to their job. So I do have that question about when can you just sort stuff out that just makes everything consistently better? And back to your point as well about a level playing field, raising all the ships in the ocean, because there is so much that a single business can do. But then how do you bring it so that everybody plays in the same field? And I think that helps a lot. And then the challenge is, though, how do you make it relevant to consumers? So energy labels are good, but energy labels can be also misconstrued because they are very simple as well. So that's another part of the challenge. What do you need to involve consumers in that clearly benefits them? But coming at it from a consumer framing is perfect. Just a couple of comments on the Ecodesign directive so far. It's good. It's a great example of great EU policy. It's money saved, performance isn't impaired, it's good societal impact. So that's a great set of principles. And I look at what my business has done. We're very passionate about the circular economy. We're a founder member of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We've tried pioneering a number of circular economy products in our business and taking to consumers. And we've had a real mix of successes and failures in that as well, which is how you keep learning. But the examples there show there are ways you can do it. It isn't cost negative, but it has to stay at a flat cost. Otherwise, you're not going to engage people anyway. But it shows what there is possible. And if you're an enlightened business, you can do some of that yourself, but then that only takes you so far. I guess the other piece of principles that I talk about is kind of transparency, consistency, and efficiency in any regulation. So where does eco-design join up with whether it's construction products regulations or other areas? That's the other piece that I would be sensitive to as well. So that's kind of a quick starter for 10. Happy to discuss any of those points further.
Thank you very much. So from Nick, we clearly heard that, yes, this is a good regulation, a good start, and then having a true consumer-oriented approach is the way to go, and also, make sure that there is transparency, consistency, and efficiency. So I was wondering whether Dustin had any reaction before we turn to the public to what the panelists said.
Sure. So
Please use the mic.
I'll just pick up on the point about Brexit, because I didn't make it explicitly, but I think it's interesting thinking about what a populist kind of framing would be for why the UK should continue with eco-design. And actually, I think British manufacturers ought to go ahead on eco-design a bit early, given that they're going to have to face the regulations eventually anyway. Imagine this sort of thought scenario. The UK leaves the EU, it decides, right, we're not going to apply eco-design regulations within the UK. Large companies that are trying to capture big markets, the sort of exporters that Britain wants to encourage, are going to design for eco-design because that's where their markets are. Little guys maybe aren't, and people who are importing products that don't meet those standards then are able to sell their products into the British market. So from a consumer perspective, you get the potential for shoddy products which don't meet the sorts of standards that you would expect for the rest of Europe. That's not good for people, that's not good for energy savings, that's not good for repair costs. I mean, the reason why I showed the columnist who was angry about his broken toaster is people get really livid about this, people get really irritated. The other thing is it's really deeply unfair competition. If you are a British manufacturer and you're wanting to export to the European market, and you are being undercut in your home market by shoddy manufacturers who don't have to meet the same standards as you, you've got a massive disadvantage compared to a German manufacturer or a French manufacturer or a Finnish manufacturer or wherever. That's not going to stick for very long if Britain wants to be competitive in the world. So I think actually, despite Brexit, there are good reasons for Britain to cooperate on eco-design and hopefully a whole host of other environmental policies as well.
Thank you. So now you've been patiently waiting and listening. Are there any questions or comments? I would ask for people to say who they are before they start. Or are you all digesting at many different levels? Yes, please. Do we need mics so that we can hear it? Because I know it's live streamed.
I can just speak up and then see the microphone's picking up.
Okay.
I'm Marius. I'm very interested. I'm from Hanover Communications. I was very interested to hear Ms. Pietkainen talk about the other aspects of eco-design, and just want to refer back to what Commissioner Timmermans actually said. He said we want to enlarge the scope and give more attention than we had in the past to wider resource efficiency experts, not just energy and water use, but also improve recyclability, durability, repairability of products. But I'm very interested to hear how you can actually legislate that, because these aspects are, rather than energy use in and by itself, are very difficult to measure, and there's no common standards yet. Is this something that is foreseeable to be legislated in the near future, or are these just issues that NGOs and industry will pick up by themselves without legislation being in place?
Who wants to respond? Sirpa?
Actually, I would assume this is to be easier than one could think. So firstly, what we need indicators. And then again, I hear quite often the debate, indicators, you can't, it takes tens of years and you can't agree, and it's so messy and you don't know what is the right figure of aluminium or whatever. Actually, there's a lot of development, intellectual and organizational, going on indicators. And they are pretty much, when it goes to life cycle analysis, that is actually sort of the basis, the same. It's just sort of creating, in quotes, the IFRS accounting in resource accounting and on indicator side. And this is because of the comparability. And think of accounting, if you wouldn't have IFRS, everybody would use the accounting standard they wish and feel free. And if it would be voluntary, it would be up to you whether you use accounting or not. I would hate to be an investor in that world. And it is just the same thing. So this is my first urge to this kind of a silent background work in the commissions, the indicators. And this has a huge impact in public procurement as well, because then if you set the standard from the indicators, you can sort of use the preferential treatment. Secondly, and this sort of caused a lot of this debate about what should we use. Should we use standards or what on recyclability or resource effectiveness? And the risk is that it stiffens the innovation. So I'm very inclined to rely on that kind of a thinking, that this is sort of a comply or explain model in a way. So it is up to science, it's up to industries to pick it up. But if it is a burden of proof is on you, show how your product is upgradable. Show how it is repairable. But we don't say whether you need to have the spare parts or whether it is repairable and upgradable in the way that I return it to the phone manufacturer and they do it internally on their processes. Or whether it is some other process that uses and sort of upgrades the materials to this kind of a tables out of the paper mass that can't be anymore used. This is upgrading too. And so it is a burden of proof on the actor. But that sort of creates innovation, that creates possibility for using service economy, and that sort of gives a much more leeway to imports. And I'm on the understanding it's easily on WTO compatible. You don't need to fight about the standards. Is this sort of a globally agreed standard that you are using?
If I'll just come in on that as well. Good question. From a business perspective, I think we do need some clarity on circular, especially. So one of the things we've talked about a lot is about the need for definitions, standards. In the UK, this year, we've been working with the British Standards Institute. Hopefully we'll rebrand that for the rest of Europe. To test and refine key elements of a draft framework standard for the principles of circular economy in organisations. That said, it is still quite possible as a business, if you've got a passion in this, you can convene your suppliers together as a retailer and get them to say, look, we do care about this. We've got a problem. How do we innovate? How do we work around it? And we did a great example of this with B&Q, so our big home improvement retailer in the UK, where it was to do with bedding plants. So bedding plants, we have a problem where they come in polystyrene containers. Polystyrene is a wasteful product that then consumers just get stuck in there, well, in the bins, and you can't recycle it, and it's no good. And we got our supply chain together, and we talked about a desire around the circular economy, and they innovated a solution where you use a coir husk, so from the inside of coconut, and you just plant that, and it biodegrades, it breaks down, and it's a wonderful product, and it's more efficient to transport. It's more convenient for the consumer. The pricing was a parity, and it increased our market share, and that is great. And we didn't need regulation to do that. But that was kind of one example of a really cool product and a really cool and successful initiative. But we sell 50,000 different product lines. So that's the challenge. And then that consistency of implementation, that clarity. And I guess that's the point I'd just close on for this bit is, that's what Europe can definitely do, is set that global leadership, that benchmark. And if you're doing that for 27, 28 countries, then there's, on global supply chains, more of a reason to get more commonality. So that's definitely where the potential is.
Thanks. Before turning back to the public, I had a question to the panelists. You talked about global leadership. We've talked about the WTO and the issue of competitiveness. I was quite struck by a recent report by the International Trade Center, which showed that where the number of private standards is rising the fastest is actually in the developing world. So consumers in the developing world are also, and there have been many scandals, as you know. So what do you think about how the circular economy package and Ecodesign can really put Europe at the forefront of leading and making the best of those potential new markets. Anyone wants to pick up? Yeah, Dustin?
We've done a little bit of thinking about this, working with a development charity called Tier Fund, because we're really interested in this relationship between products that get manufactured and designed in Europe, but which may perhaps be sold across the entire world. At the moment, products that are designed for the wealthy world, if they're not designed to be repairable, they end up, in best case scenario, they end up getting junked if they're sold in Brazil or India or wherever. But if we can design products to be more repairable, then that opens up a whole new value chain in these countries. And Tier Fund has done specifically some research in Brazil, which shows that the local value to a Brazilian economy of being able to repair, I think they looked at washing machines, is really, really significant. And actually, if you're thinking about how you, as a European manufacturer, you might make money or might have some value out of that, there are a couple interesting things that there's an upside for you on. The first is, we know from work that we've done on laptops that people in the developing world will choose products that are more repairable, more durable over cheaper clones. So people choose Apple products because they're perceived to be long-lasting and durable, and well, they used to be repairable, over even cheaper, often local market or Chinese imported clones. So there's kind of a brand value thing there. But also, if you think about the big challenge, how are we going to give the value of all the stuff that we have in the wealthy world to the next 2 or 3 billion middle-class consumers in the world? We've got to deliver the services without necessarily using the same amount of materials. So if we can have a servitized offer whereby you get that, you keep that thing in use for longer, maybe it's a European company that does the servicing, maybe it's a contracted thing out, that allows us to extend the benefits of washing machines, of all the electricals that we use, to the developing world without the kind of resource footprint. And frankly, if you look at the kind of planetary boundaries that we have to live within, it's difficult to see how you do it any other way.
Thank you. Yes?
Arthur ten Wolde from De Groene Zaak, part of ACES. Also on the subject of circular economy, speaking for Ecopreneur, which is the Federation of European Sustainable Businesses. We are very much in favor, like Sirpa Pietkainen, of strong government policies to boost eco-design. And one way how this could be realized, concerning your question, is what could be possible if that you use a mechanism like the best available technologies. Per sector, per product, what is the best available practice? Maybe taking it a bit wider than technology, because it's also about design and about the materials that you use. And so then you could set standards, minimum requirements that are already being done by pioneers. And then take that in a way that you don't destroy your industry. Many of our companies, most of our companies are SMEs. So in that way, you could gradually get higher standards. That's the way that we envisage it.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Emily Waterfield, I'm a journalist with MLEX. I just wondered if the panel have any initial thoughts on the 6 products that were named yesterday by the Commission for eco-design standards. Considered a list of 15 and picked out the 6, including kettles, not including toasters, famously. The Commission said it had picked the 6 out of that list that offered the best energy and cost savings. Does it look to you at the moment like that is a good 6 to be going for, or there are other products that really should have been looked at, or products on that list that we could wait a little while before addressing? Thanks.
Thank you. Any pickup? Dustin?
I can pick that up. It's a shame about toasters, but hey, we are where we are. I'm encouraged that kettles have made it in from a purely British perspective, that they're in everyone's home and they're deeply salient. I think the Commission could have a real win if it required kettles to be more durable. This is completely anecdotal, so take it with as much salt as you like, but Green Alliance's kettle has broken 3 times in the last year, and it's really frustrating, and our office manager is just like livid about it. And let me tell you, the rest of the organization is too, because for a country that is addicted to tea, not having a kettle is like, man the battle station's disaster territory. Slightly more seriously, though, I was a bit disappointed to not see mobile phones in there. It feels like there are some real low-hanging fruits there. We've pointed that out. I mean, cracked screens are such an obvious thing to do, and it's dead easy to measure. You know, if your screen cracks when you drop it, you don't have the right kind of screen. We know that a genuinely unbreakable screen is available on the market today. That could be the standard. Similarly, software support. Everyone's rightly concerned about hacking. We know that Apple has supported the iPhone 4 for 56 months, but the average Android phone gets supported for only 22. There's no really good reason for that, and that's the kind of thing that regulation could drive up for the benefits of consumers and the environment.
Sirpa, and
then I'll pick up another question. Yes, I think that we should have this kind of overall principles used much more. And this best available technology is very effective. And even though this goes beyond on the other track than the eco-design, buildings is an example where we have a huge amount of the resources and that you can't renovate many times within the 30 years. This is your business. So actually, we should have a regulation and a benchmark that then when you renovate, you would need to renovate your building at some point within the 30 years. You would need to create it mainly energy positive, not only zero, energy positive. And you should use best available technologies in all of the parts, not only that you sub-optimize, you use energy efficient lighting or insulation or whatever, but in all parts, and think what kind of a market that would actually create. Another good example of this kind of effective tools prolonging the time of the products is guarantees. And I know this is extremely difficult, but this is a debate what we should start. What is sort of the legitimate life expectancy of a pen or a printer or a mobile phone or a washing machine? And then this goes to the thinking of the performance economy. I do not buy a washing machine because it's a luxury item I want to admire in my household. I'm buying the performance that I get clean clothes. And I don't buy a toaster because I want to have a new toaster with the radio. I want to have the toasted bread. And sometimes we sort of forget this simple thing. And that's why I would be very perfectly happy with the same toaster 50 years of my life. Can't do it. Have to keep on buying a new one that actually doesn't improve my life quality. Quite contrary.
Thank you, Sirpa. Seb, and then Nick.
Sure, thank you. It was just to pick up this point on best available technology. I think one of the things that has struck me in the work that we're doing on the emissions committee into car emissions, or vehicle emissions, has been that the idea that there is obviously always a kind of evolving technological pattern that will deliver far fewer emissions, less cost, greater fuel efficiency, and so on and so forth, but that the incentive to get there isn't always necessarily in the right place. The legislation always tends to lag behind and always kind of does several iterations before when it's kind of deemed safe that the industry as a whole can meet those standards, and then we can legislate. But of course there are others who have developed technology that goes further, but that incentive to develop that technology that goes further is often at the end of the research line that improves the efficiency or the fuel efficiency or reduces the cost or whatever it is, that gives the consumer a benefit and that gives the in the case of cars, the OEM the benefit. Now, how we shift that kind of to get a symbiotic relationship between the benefit to the consumer, the benefit to the producer, and the benefit to the planet, I think is going to be the key challenge that we have. And of course, in all of this, legislation has to try and be one step forward. We're always allergic to that kind of approach because the pushback is always, oh, it's unachievable, it can't be done. And even if a sort of what we deem to be a reasonable time period is applied, it's always there's always a significant pushback. So we need some way of getting that symbiotic relationship, and we also need some way of making sure that the legislation can keep up with that technological development. But on the face of it, of course, as a principle, it's one that we should follow.
So I'm just going to come in a couple of kind of thoughts I have to that. So first, I noticed they talk a lot into context of which products. The point about being evidence-based, so like that as a guiding principle, Second, I'm wary of great being the enemy of good, because in a business, it's about pragmatism. It's about what's going to make the most substantive change fastest and at scale. So I'd kind of worry about let's get the good right. And then your point about, every 30 years, let's renovate homes. Well, I'm actually kicking myself, and my business is probably asking why I'm not lobbying for this now anyway. But my slight fear is, okay, and what does that mean to the end consumer? How much is it going to cost? And we've got loads of people that aren't living in adequate housing currently. We have growing problems with the standards of rental houses. We need people to have better homes generally. And if that will help drive that, great. If it becomes too expensive that they can't afford to do it and everyone keeps cutting corners, then we have a different problem again, and we're not actually solving the underlying problem. And then back to elections, Brexit, disconnected society, we reinforce that.
Sirpa wanted to add something. Thanks, Nick.
I'm fully supportive of your approach, being more sort of a Lego-like house that you can renovate and reuse, and more energy efficient. Can't mean it's worse for the consumer, that it has worse indoor air quality and it costs more. It means it needs to save the money because it's energy efficient. It needs to be more flexible because now people can sort of rearrange the sizes of the rooms, for example, better. It means it has a better materials so that the air quality is better and the whole air conditioning is better planned. And I think that we can actually achieve, and this very important point, and when I was referring just that you do not have a wrong understanding, the 30 years, that actually now we are making the incremental changes that actually in theory forces everybody to renovate every 10th year their house. Because you say you have to increase your energy efficiency with 5% or 15%. Then you go after 10 years and you say, okay, now you have to increase it again with the 15% or 20%. And basically to achieve that, you would need to renovate and re-renovate and re-renovate. And the maximum is once, it should be maximum once in 30 years you make this kind of a big renovation, and that's it. Then you should do all as well as you can. Then I'm very sorry. But I'll try to use the Seb as an excuse. And the elections, this is my election quote. You can't control life. You can't predict the result of the elections. You just have to live with that. And you can't control the parliamentary activities. And so I have a very important meeting in the parliament, 2:30. So I'm really sorry to leave you. I would prefer to stay here, but there's no choice. But I hope to continue keeping contact with you and continue the discussions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirpa, and thanks to you for your leadership on this issue. So before I turn back to the public, Dustin's story reminded me of my own kettle nightmare. So I'm a mother of 2 children. I don't have a lot of time. And my kettle, normally you push the button and then it works, right? It doesn't anymore. So I have to keep pushing the button. And the time it takes for the water to warm, and every time I'm like, should I go and repair? That's going to take ages. Or should I just throw it away and buy a new one? And I can't resolve it. So now it's been like 2 years that I every morning spend that time with and I think that I get so annoyed that my life expectancy is going to be reduced as a result. So as a consumer, I would definitely look forward to have better kettles. We've heard a lot about construction, and I'm aware that there are people from the construction sector in the room. So yes, you had a question? Yeah, the microphone, and then I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Christoph Seitz from the construction industry. Shame Sirpa's gone because it was a reaction to her initial intervention. We've heard about products, and there was the question about definitions, and we've heard from buildings to mobile phone or just mobile phone screens. So I guess the first question is, what is a product? Because construction products are placed on the market with a declaration of performance, which was another word used. Buildings are not placed on the market. And if we look at design, what are you designing for? I mean, you're talking about your screen that shouldn't break. So will that screen be a better product for recycling? I don't know. If we look at buildings, Nick has just mentioned, we have a real issue with affordability. So should we design to meet affordability question? At the moment, the only requirement in law is energy efficiency. Of course, now we're looking at adaptation to climate change. And all these requirements are very interesting targets, but they require different designs. So, so what are the targets? Because we're talking about eco-design, but we don't hear a single target that we should design for. And that's the issue. And for the construction industry, many targets, many solutions. But what is it that we go for? Because we need to select one or a few, but everyone has got a cost and a scenario. So what is a product, and what are we aiming for?
Who wants to pick up that question?
I'll pick up I'll pick up part of it, and I'm going to push back a little bit. The world is complicated. Manufacturers have a difficult job to balance different and competing priorities, but I think manufacturers are selling to consumers, and it's useful to think about what consumers actually want. There's a fantastic piece of opinion research done by ASDA a couple of years ago now, looking at their customers, and this kind of picks up on your point, Nick. Do they think about green? And the answer is, it's not usually something that most people think, shall I buy that green product or not? What they think is, actually, they have a sort of baseline that they expect. They expect all products to be green. In fact, the report was called Green is Normal, because that was kind of the summary of all of their opinion research. People kind of expect manufacturers and retailers to make the right choices for them. They don't want a choice between an affordable house and an energy efficient house and be like, oh, well, shall I choose the one I can afford, or shall I choose the one that's energy efficient? They say, no, I want a cheap, energy efficient house. That's your job, manufacturers. Go on and do it. And that, in a way, is where innovation comes in. I mean, thinking about the automotive industry, one of the most fascinating things about that industry is that they have innovated so spectacularly in response to legislative drivers pushing them, for example, to reduce the carbon emissions of transport. If we set the targets and we give people a clear steer and enough time to implement them, it's amazing what engineers and technologists can do.
Yes, in the back. And I don't think there's a microphone, I think. Oh, sorry, I forgot to. I'll give you the floor just afterwards.
Thank you. Justin Wilkes, Deputy Director of ECOS. We're an environmental organisation specialised in eco-design and standardisation. My question's on Brexit, as a UK national as well as an Irish national. From an eco-design perspective, what sort of Brexit are you looking for? A hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, long Brexit, short Brexit, confused, wobbly? What would you like from an eco-design perspective? And a second question, if I may, from a civil service capacity perspective and a political perspective in the UK, would you really like to see the UK doing eco-design, and do you think it will be done well as a national policy if the UK is not part of the single market?
Okay, easy set of questions.
Ooh, my favourite topic again, right? Yeah, well, I think, can I take them together? And by the way, a UK national is also an Irish national. I think that there's more of you in recent months than has previously been. I'm one of you as well. The problem that we have here, of course, is that there was one vote on one question, leave or remain. And there was absolutely no other question on the ballot paper. There wasn't, should we stay in the single market? Should we stay in the customs union? Should we have a hard border with Northern Ireland? Should we have freedom of movement? Should we not have freedom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of discussion that's now being had is sort of retroactive, with various people claiming, well, the mandate is clearly to control immigration, which is undoubtedly a big part of the vote, but cannot be seen to be a majority of the electorate, given the different reasons that people have cited for having voted leave. Given it's a slim majority, 51.9, 1.9% over 50, you would have to have had everybody voting on immigration lines in order to say let's restrict immigration. And of course, the key question that was never put, which is now being mooted in Switzerland for a potential second referendum there, following their decision in 2014 on freedom of movement, is effectively a question between, do you want to trade in the single market or do you want to close the borders? Because you can't do both. And this fundamental question has still not been recognised, appreciated, or nobody has got to grips with it in many of the main political parties, my own included, where we're now having a debate about, well, obviously we want to end freedom of movement, but we also want to stay in the single market. It's not possible. It's just not possible. So from my point of view, the only way to avoid falling off an economic cliff is to stay in the single market. Our manufacturing industry depends on it. Our services industry absolutely depends on it. And if we fell back on some sort of WTO tariff free trade agreement that would take years, and in the current climate, let's face it, would look pretty unlikely to be successful, we would potentially be hiking up the cost of doing business in the UK and setting ourselves back massively, which is why I think on the eco-design point, we need to be as integrated as possible. In effect, if we leave the European Union, it has to be the closest relationship to the one we currently have as is possible, which means staying in the single market. And that would, of course, have a limited impact on the UK's ability to not just innovate and drive design, but to be a world leader as well, given its access to the European market, given its ability to sell its ideas and products, and to be part of a Europe-wide drive on eco-design, even if it can't be at the decision-making table. Obviously, I would argue that's a loss, but we are where we are.
My answer would be I'd like a UK-EU Brexit, please. I don't know what that means, really. But what I can say is actually to come back on one point there about immigration. Actually, I do think it is a lot about immigration, and that's the one thing that I see our Prime Minister is absolutely crystal clear on. And certainly I speak to the people who voted for Brexit, and it's immigration. There's a piece around democracy as well, but that's the one consistent line. Everything else about, yeah, we quite like lots of other things, and we're not really being very clear or consistent or indeed realistic or appreciative of the rest of the Europe's view at the moment. So there's quite a lot of discussions. And if I talk about it from my business perspective, we talk about three things that really matter. We certainly care about the trade piece. We see a downside for UK consumers in that, but also we do see flip side for our customers, whether they're in France, Poland, Romania, Germany, etc. So, you know, there is a collective loss there. We talk about the people piece, because although we do have, as a country, a concern about this immigration, we clearly need, whether it's high-skilled workers or indeed low-skilled and indeed temporary workers as well. There are large swathes of our industry that fall over without that. 35% of the horticulture sector in the UK are non-UK workers. Over 300,000 tradesmen in the UK are not from the UK, whether that's electricians, plumbers, builders, and we have a housing crisis in the UK. The other thing I'm very clear about is about consistency of regulation. So we are advocating that very strongly. And indeed, I'm relatively optimistic about that. I think for the UK government going forwards in the context of eco-design, my question would be, what value are you going to add? If it's about added innovation, added commercial opportunity, more global and European opportunity there, then great. If it's doing it for the sake of doing it, some belief that by themselves in an English way it'll be better, then that would be very disturbing.
Dustin?
I might just pick up on perhaps a slightly technical point, but I think it does link to a broader question. On eco-design, my view is that it is in Britain's national interest to remain integrated into the eco-design system, whatever the wider relationship that the UK has with the EU. But there's one sticking point that will make this quite difficult, and that's the enforcement mechanisms. One of the things that has run in the Brexit campaign was we don't want European courts to decide on British things, whatever they are. Well, the single market is something that has to be decided, you know, breaches of the single market need to be decided at single market level, which makes that quite complicated to figure out what a UK enforcement mechanism is. There might be an upside here, and I guess I would draw a parallel to the experience of emissions, some of the stuff that's come out about emissions cheating or alleged emissions cheating in the automotive sector. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that that was found out in the United States, partially because the manufacturers that were accused were not American manufacturers, but more significantly because the American approach to measurement and to enforcement is a really rigorous kind of adversarial testing process where the regulator goes out, checks, tests, and pushes really hard. And I think the criticism I would make of the current EU regulatory and testing mechanism is that it's kind of shop around for a regulator in one of 28 or perhaps 27 EU member states, find the one that's the softest touch, get it into the single market, and then don't bother too much about whether or not it matches up the claims and things like that. If, as a result of Brexit, we could solve that problem and get a better enforcement mechanism, both for the UK and the rest of Europe, I think that would benefit everyone.
I'm just going to come in on the back of that, because that consistency of regulation and that inconsistency that a business you have with your products going across multiple markets is one of the true banes of our lives. The single market and the digital single market, all of this stuff is less efficient because there are every EU regulator does things slightly differently. We have angle grinders that when they go to Germany, they have to have an extra switch on them because that's the German regulator. And because that's the highest standard regulator, well, then we'll just might as well make that switch for everywhere else. It is deeply inefficient. And kind of one of my big things about Europe is about that better implementation. It's not sausage machining more regulation and laws for the sake of it. It's about better regulation and making sure member states have implemented it consistently, because that is the big challenge.
Thanks. Please.
Okay, so, thank you very much. I'm David Fitzsimons from Oakley in Holland. We manage the European remanufacturing network, amongst other things. And to follow on from that point, Nick, you reminded us about the BS 8001 process, which is going on in the UK for the circular economy. And my question is really about why on earth is the EU even bothered about toasters or kettles or some of those other smaller products? I might have an answer to that en route, but I might not be so direct. Firstly, we know there's an established pathway, which is regulations and standards, then innovation. That changes competition and business models. That leads to jobs and growth. That's the pathway. We've known it for decades. And in the remanufacturing area, the question is, where is the leadership coming from? That's where we started today. And traditionally, we've become very accustomed to American leadership in this area of regulations and standards on that pathway. The EU joined in on behalf of all European countries. And the place that we haven't spoken about at all is China. And in remanufacturing, there is an industrial strategy about remanufacturing in China. And the Chinese are trying to, at this very moment, trying to put 7 new standards for remanufacturing in place through the ISO process. Mm-hmm. Why? You've just got to think about that and then say, okay, we understand possibly why. What's the EU going to do about that? And frankly, the EU having this big debate about toasters or kettles is too small scale, symbolic, and really missing the point of that traditional pathway about jobs and growth. Somehow, this debate has come off the path, which is about ultimately jobs and growth, competition, business models, and beating the Chinese or the Americans or someone else at this game.
So are we missing the point? Anyone wants to answer?
Thank you. No, I mentioned China earlier just because on this front there is a lot of leadership coming out of China. Another issue, but the emissions trading scheme being a good example of where innovation is driving forward a lot of creative thinking on something that is clearly not working as it should at a European level, but they have taken elements of what works here, copied it, improved it, come up with new suggestions, and they're pretty much ready to go. And it's exciting, actually. We had a very good meeting with a delegation a few weeks ago that kind of was very clear that this is not a back issue or something that they're kind of dealing with a sort of backlash for obvious reasons given the Chinese political system, but they are driving this forward because they recognize the real need to get this right. And that I find exciting from the point of view that if we do lose American leadership, which I very much hope we don't, but if we do, then we're going to need a race to the top that is very different to the one we have at the moment. And you're right that if the European Union kind of sits back and sort of, I mean, by the way, I do think it is important we deal with the toasters and the kettles and the consumer products that you know, use a lot of energy. But you're right that we need to do that in a way that acknowledges what is going on in big markets like China, because we could very well find ourselves in a situation in 10, 15 years' time, hence where the Chinese standards are the ones that everybody else is running up to try and catch up to. And of course, they then get the competitive advantage. And we find ourselves sort of scratching our heads going, how did this happen? You're right, we need to be aware of that and we need to preempt it, because they are driving forward a lot of innovation on this front.
Yes, I think your point about the strategic perspective is extremely valid. I'll just share one anecdote around Chinese manufacture and one of the challenges we had. So we tried to circularize, for want of a better expression, a power tool, so a drill, and do that with our Chinese manufacturing partners. But the problem was that particularly the plastic piece and the guarantee that the feedstock for plastic was going to be of the right quality, would meet REACH regulations, is why it fell over. So that's one of the areas where actually we had a fail in that. And that's the piece about actually the waste streams, and particularly in plastic, is extremely difficult to get right and ensure our first priority that it's safe and secure for the customer at the end of the line. So, yeah, I think you're exactly right there. That macro strategic question about clarity of purpose behind this really, as opposed to the debate of kettles versus toasters, is very valid.
So we're slowly coming to the end. Is there one last question, short one? Two last questions, very short, that we'll take them in a row.
Hi, Ugo Valauri from the Restart project in the UK. We work on enhancing repair and repair culture of small electrical and electronics by inspiring people to learn how to repair more themselves. And I'd like to touch upon some of your previous points, both
quickly,
Dustin
please.
and
Sorry.
Nick. Well, so there's a lot of solutions that are out there from the technological perspective already. You said that consumers we need to learn what consumers want, what they care about, and they have little time. The experience we have seen thousands of people that come to our events to learn how to repair things is that people really do care about extending the life of products, but it needs to be simple to them to do that. Now, regulations might not help always, but why is it that other systems such as eco-labeling do not provide sufficient incentives for manufacturers to make solutions that are more directly tangible and real to people? We really see the lack of any leadership from the private sector in coming up with easy access to spare parts, real access for long enough periods, and more designs that affect repairability as opposed to ease of recycling. So even though this is eco-design links to energy efficiency, I think we need something a bit more substantial to really link together the concerns that Dustin has and your perspective too.
Okay, let's take the last question. Thank you.
Thank you. Gav Adderley from Suez. Just picking up on David, but taking a slightly different tack. I was wondering whether there might be some merit in looking at a slightly different approach to applying eco-design. It strikes me that the present product-by-product approach is so laborious and so time-consuming that I'm probably going to be in my grave before we eventually get around to toasters, and perhaps even turn to dust before we even consider of expanding the directive to non-energy issues. Wouldn't it be better to think of a system where we can apply a general set of eco-design principles right across the board that would apply to televisions, toasters, and to toothbrushes? I, of course, exaggerate slightly, but taking a much more framework approach, if you like, to the eco-design directive and putting in targets so that you then place the onus, I think Sirpa alluded to this, put the onus on manufacturers to do rather more and allow then the market to decide what the best products would be. It seems to me that that approach would be administratively and legislatively far more efficient, and it would be enable us to apply eco-design principles much quicker than we have at this point. At the moment, the products that we have selected are about a fraction of the total product range in the market. It doesn't seem to me to be a sensible approach to stick to.
Okay, thank you. So we had a question about framework and about repairability. Could I ask all the panelists to give their last words and answer those last two questions at the same time? Who wants to start? Dustin?
Thank you. There are a lot of questions, so I'll just rapid fire through them. Eco-labeling, I think there are too many eco-labels and they're confusing for people. That's the main challenge with the labeling stuff. Spare parts, I don't actually know what to do more than to look to where businesses are doing this themselves, and that's usually where they have decided that distributed repair, i.e. where people fix their own products, is cheaper for them than a warranty process where they have to take things back in. The best example I can think of is Dyson, which makes spare parts available because they've decided that sending out an engineer is expensive and enabling a customer to repair because they're designed well is cheap. So let's have some more of that. On your point about should we go for broad principles, I like the simplicity of that approach. When we looked at this, it felt to us like there were kind of two broad approaches you could take. You could either go down the eco-design route, which the virtue of which is you can get into the deep detail of an individual product and understand that the screen on a laptop is different from I don't know, the glass on an industrial chiller or something like that. It allows you to really attune what you're trying to do to the specifics of a particular product. The other approach is essentially turns into individual producer responsibility or warranty extension periods. So you just say, right, company, you have to take this thing back and do the best thing you can with it. The Japanese have a really interesting system in this regard, but it really depends on having a manufacturer in the same locality as the demanufacturer, and it works best when you've got a system where it's big companies that are doing it. So there are some drawbacks to that. There is perhaps a halfway house somewhere in between those two, but at the moment Ecodesign is what we've got, so I'm kind of inclined to try to make it work faster and better rather than reinvent the system.
I think both really valid questions, really good perspectives. From our side, looking across the industry, the sector I work in, repairability and rental are both models we see work in some places, but not in all. So I think there's definitely more potential and more scope there. There's definitely something about how do we engage our customers more in that, and I think that's something we're certainly open-minded to. It's trying to find the right way of making that work, and ultimately being a commercial business, you often start with one business model and that works very well and you get that really efficient. How do you add on different services, different business models to it? How do you revise that and make that work? And that's always quite a change for any organization. So, no, very valid questions. I'm curious about hearing more specifically about your initiative as well.
Thanks. On the incentive points, of course, there's so many different incentives that work for different people. Cost, impact on the environment, energy efficiency, air quality as well, as we were talking about earlier in terms of home insulation, so on and so forth. But the idea behind, I suppose, a simple product labeling is to create the best blend of incentives that kind of work at a very simplistic level. When it comes to food quality and nutritional information, we've obviously gone through several iterations, and indeed are still several iterations of what food labeling looks like. But ultimately, there are some that are more successful than others, and I think we should learn from that process when it comes to consumer produce. Your point about the repair, I find this really interesting, that the idea that the consumer becomes, in effect, responsible for fixing and maintaining a product to extend its lifespan and indeed reduce cost to the consumer. There are a whole, clearly companies like Dyson operate on a business model that allows that, but for most, the issue of warranties and voiding warranties and so on is obviously a big hurdle to overcome. So in my mind, I'm not sure whether that comes from a kind of incentive from legislation or some sort of campaign that might be launched at a commission level. But there is something, I think, to be said for reforming the ways in which a lot of products are covered under warranty and guarantee, to ensure that if the repair process is something that can be made consumer friendly, that indeed should be encouraged for the purposes of extending the product of lifespan of products. And on the broad principle versus the kind of specific regulation, the specific regulation obviously by its very nature being much slower, much more piecemeal, and kind of making all the political compromises that we've touched upon vis-a-vis Toastergate. I think you're right that having the broad principles kind of understood and accepted as a direction of travel is important. My worry is, of course, and again I touch on the automotive industry, the truth is that you tend to get away with the least possible that you can get away with. We see, for example, some products that are different depending on the market in which they're sold, even though the technology clearly exists to make the product the best at the best available standard. But depending on the different regulations on different markets, if the market is big enough to get away with something less, then many manufacturers will do so. So combining, in effect, the kind of the strict standards from a bottom-up level with the individual products with a broad principle. I don't think, for example, most people would appreciate the principles behind what's being done on toasters and kettles and so on and so forth. But if it's firmly established and the route path is firmly established in the same way that, for example, solar panel installation is clearly a part of fighting climate change, but also reducing your energy bill, if it can be put in terms like that the consumer understands, I think we can marry the two. But I agree with you. It would be wonderful if we could get that approach to cover everything. Perhaps one day we will, but I think we should combine the two.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists today, and thank you very much to the audience. Stay tuned, because obviously the Commission made the announcement. We haven't seen the details of the proposal, so I'm sure there'll be more analysis coming up from Green Alliance and ACES when the details are known. And maybe to end, it was really striking to me to realize that if the rest of the world were to adopt today's European lifestyle by 2050, we would need the resources of 2 planet Earth. So clearly within this context, the announcement we had is good news, but let's not kid ourselves, much more is going to be needed if Europe wants to fulfill its commitments made at the UN on sustainable production and consumption by 2030. And I'm afraid the bad news is that we have less than 5,000 days left before 2030. So let's not get too much distracted, whether by Brexit or the US elections, and let's continue working together. Thank you.